Wow. So this just brought up for me an example of what the sort of societal pockets and how they affect us. When my mother was working in Johannesburg, in the city and in Cape Town as well, whenever we would talk about like relationships and things like that, she'd be like, you know what, my love, it's okay, I love you no matter who you love, however you love and stuff like that. And she's now retired and she's living in the rurals in in the Xhosa outbacks, like dusty roads and stuff like that, and everything is done from a more, I don't want to say backward, but like it's just a very rural background. And recently, maybe it was about a year or so ago, maybe a bit longer, since she's been there, I remember we were talking about relationships, and then at some point she's like, Kota, you're not gay, right, my boy? And I'm like, hey, that changed. Like, it's just realizing that I think the difference was like her being in the city had all of these liberal takes on how, you know, people love, and then as soon as you get into these sort of limited thinking levels that her society provided at that place, it made her thinking go back down to, oh, actually maybe it's not okay if he's not what everybody says it should be. And okay, that's just something I just wanted to share. Upon what we've been discussing right now is Bandile gave a great example of how life, society can be when you sort of strip off the labels. And I've also been hearing how not to use labels on people, but how can we? What language? What verbal navigation can we then use? Audience? Yes.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
So I remember being in a company, and this is what this guy did. Every time we come into rehearsal, he'd say, okay, so, you know, we have a check-in as artists, you're like, hey, I'm feeling like this, or whatever. But what he'd say is that, so your name is, and I say, what do you identify as today? Do you understand?
Oh, shit.
So you are giving me the power to say, no, today I'm feeling like a she, feeling like a he, or feeling like all of it. But you're not giving me the time to say, this is me today, this is what I want to do. You're not assuming, you're not projecting or transferring whatever you think of me. So I think that's another thing. That thing, yeah, self-definition.
That's beautiful.
And that's what our people do all the time. In charge. When we talk to each other. Know that there are energies, there are people, there are spaces. So when we know that there are energies and people and spaces, we know that there are differences here in terms of gender, sexuality. You're not just boxed into one thing. And also, how do you expect us to be one thing when we come from different things? You come from a man and a woman, right? So why am I expected to be this one thing, this particular sexuality? Just saying.
That's dope. That's dope. Do you know what that just brought me back to? It brought me back to what we saying that we're creating in the space, which is a neutral space that seeks to understand. Now, what Khotato said to me, or saying to us right now, is with this person going, how do you feel like today gives them the platform to be different tomorrow? What if we created that for each other every day, which is like a neutral space of seeking to just go, hey, where you at today? Who are you today? Actually, today I feel lady loving, or man loving, or masculine loving, or that's dope. That's dope. So how then do we cultivate that? Yes.
I'd like to add to what you're saying. So I'm sitting here, I got in a bit late, but I can tell you for the small time that I've been here, I'm sitting here and I'm almost having a panic attack because I'm feeling like there's so much information and I feel like I'm so overloaded. I came because, you know, I wanted to hear and I wanted to learn, and I guess seeking for those neutral spaces that you speak of, you know, that we can speak openly about everything, so to speak. But as the doctor was saying in the middle, there's a problem in terms of the language that we use, there's a problem in terms of the spaces that we create as well. Because even when I saw the poster, I was a bit skeptical because I was like, is it just going to be men talking? Is it, can I come through? Can I, and you want to engage with the space. I know a couple of friends of mine who are just like, I don't know, maybe it's just going to be men just doing their own thing. So I have that curiosity, and the curiosity drove me here. So in essence, I think what I'm trying to get at is, how do we make sure, in layman's terms, and yes, it's not, it's a complex dialogue that we have today, right? But how do we begin to really get the conversations going at an everyday level? Where, I love what you just said now about somebody just saying, okay, how do you feel today? Stuff like that, like just getting those conversations going without us necessarily only having to have those conversations in spaces like this. Because today, we've got how many people here? Okay, these people are going to move out and they're going to, influence whoever they influence. But there's so many people outside right now, and they don't know about the quality of conversation that's happening here. And I feel like a lot of us, people who start, getting these conversations going, we always, as much as we try to open up the conversation, we don't open it up enough, because I don't see the elderly people here really do.
For me, it's not about the labels as such, because there are people who died for these labels. Let's begin with the fact that the gay movement had a lot of sacrifices from people who actually were proud to announce themselves as gay. And I think that firstly, I think we need to own up to the labels. And then once we own up to the labels, express them the way we want them to be, and give them the meaning that we want them to have, and make sure that they attain multifarious, multiple ways of expression in such a way that when somebody says you're not gay enough, or you're not straight enough, or you're not a man enough, well, you're like, well, this is what it means for me to be a man, and I am a man, and I am straight, I am heterosexual. So I think it begins there. I think it's about giving multiplicity to the terms and the concepts themselves, and making sure that they are unstuck, because right now they are stuck and mobilized within very concretized ways of expression and meaning. That's what for me it is about. And the question of experimentation for me is very interesting, because, for example, being a straight man and being a heterosexual man, part of the reasons it's so difficult for straight men to speak about sexuality and sex and gender for themselves is precisely because to be a man and straight is a very bland meal, and nobody likes to eat a bland if you are straight, you are a man, then we know that you will never get penetrated. We know that you will never wear a dress. We know that there are certain things that just don't apply to who you are, and so there's a consensual understanding around what it means to be a man. There's nothing to discuss around it. There's nothing to debate around it. There's nothing to negotiate around the understanding that you're a man. But once you really understand that being a man is not so simple, once you actually start to unpack it, to actually look at what research has said about, for example, even prostate massaging, that actually whether you're straight or whether you're gay, if you want to reduce your chances of prostate cancer, you have to learn to massage your prostate. That means that whether you are gay or straight, if you have a woman in your life, you need to learn to put something in your ass, so that so that on its own becomes problematic. If you are fixed on rigid notions of what it is to be a man, you will never get penetrated. And all the other sort of constellation of assumptions that we have lumped onto these terms. It's beginning to understand that really being a man is not so simple, it's not so fixed. It is multifarious, it is open, and being a man means that you can be a house husband, for example, which right now is something that makes you become attacked and questioned. Your manhood suddenly is put under a microscope, and you are in crisis if you. And so it's beginning to understand that manhood can still remain manhood and be able to perform all those other roles and still be manhood. You can be gay and still do all those things. So for me, that's what it's
Potato, bless us.
But also, my thing is also what I struggle with. That's why I'm saying is I find it problematic. In as much as you can be a heterosexual man, it's still based on context, right? You're a man, right? And what does you are labeled as a man once you go away?
In David.
You get what I'm saying? So it's always, the labels are always, because that's why I'm very about this thing of us defining ourselves. Because then what does it say if I'm not going to the mountain? Then I'm not a man. I'm not man enough. You understand? So that's why I say labels are very problematic when we are taking other than what people are saying to us. The word gay, it came at some point and it was not a word influenced from me. That didn't come from me. It came from someone else. And for the fact that it didn't come from me and someone is defining what it is, makes it problematic for me. That's why it's even like with our struggle as black people, that even blackness is not defined the same. If we are here right now, we are seeing ourselves as black, a certain type of black. When you go to the States, the black is different, right? So even the queerness, we have to realize that it's different and you can't consider. That's why I'm saying labeling. It's not kawata. It's not kawata. Because we're not talking to be child of people or man. Because instead of saying, someone did this and they wrote this up in this time, era, whatever, great. They were talking about, most of the time it's based on their experience and they're sharing it in that space. So context, big level context, big label. Because I go back on YouTube, they create a different thing and a different meaning. So that's where I am right now.
Here's a Salt Bay moment where I just add a little bit of spice just to see what happens if you question this. The same way as street lights, street names and buildings and whatever, they are labeled, isn't it? Isn't it a thing, sort of like a map to help understand humanity in a way? To go, oh, okay, cool, is a white person, so like, they're going to need a brush instead of an Afro comb. You understand what I'm saying? So is there a way to possibly allow those labels and meanings to sit differently within us?
I think it's like, when you go to Google Maps, right? How navigates when you're going somewhere? Because that thing when you go, it's either you're walking, or you're going to text, or you're going to trade. That I think that's a scenario. So it can show you where you're going, but how you're going to go there is a different route. So how I'm going to define my kid is ultimately it will come back to the person who taught you. It will come back to him as money. It will always come back to me, because also the struggle I think is that we're at a point where this identity has been so oppressed that it becomes as if it's the only thing that you are as a human being. So you have to go through other things as a human being. So why navigate? We're not going to take the same route. They can say, okay, but okay, is right. That's the thing. That's why they don't do it, because it becomes like it's set in stone. Like, that's why I find problems with people who stop each other opinion.
So
I completely agree. I completely agree with the fact that terms and categories can be very limiting. And you said something interesting. You said that blackness in South Africa is different, and it varies. And even when you go to the US, blackness means something else. But what I like is the fact that you agree that it's blackness. And I agree with you when you say that what it means for you or for any other person to be gay means something completely different to the next person, which is exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that the problem with categories is that over time, they seem to monopolize one way of being. It's not necessarily that the label itself becomes a problem, because labels or categories identify us, give us a way of talking, give us a language of talking about us and our experiences. If you don't have a word, a way, someone else is going to come up with, or you are going to come up with another one at some point. So for me, it's not really about the fact that the words or the labels or the categories themselves are a problem. It's about the way they become used over time. And I agree with you, and for me, it is about democratizing the labels so that they reflect and they encapsulate and they embody everyone's experience. And I wanted to say something also to the doctor in the middle that I forgot. The medical fraternity is partly also to blame, to be honest. Throughout history, what you guys have done is that the medical practice has been implicated in self-correcting procedures that get caught up in the assumption that there are only two sexes. There is male and female, whereas in actual fact, over 1,000 people for every 1 million people are born not necessarily being male or female. They are born hermaphrodites, they are born intersex, but corrective procedures that are done by the medical fraternity end up creating a situation where a child who's born with two organs ends up being exercised and being cut so that the parents will feel as if their child is normal. So it's not just a social issue. The medical fraternity itself is actually to blame because medicine is not socially neutral or culturally neutral. Medicine itself has been throughout history involved in corrective, very ideologically problematic positions that created a world in which nurses and doctors themselves today struggle up until now when they get a child with two body parts and suddenly it's a crisis. Why should it be a crisis? The reason it's a crisis is because they understand socially, culturally that in order for you to be a human being, a proper human being, you either have to be male or female, you know, so.
Just to respond again to that, and I agree, this is something that we struggle with. That's why when we, approach the Department of Health, and this is where I sit in as a technical advisor for what we call key population. I mean, if you go to any research institution or anywhere, we talk about key population, we talk about men who have sex with men. And even that term, men who have sex with men, it's in the context of HIV and STI. It's not in the context of a social interaction. It doesn't define anyone in any place. It's just to make us as clinicians or service provider to understand that the risk of unprotected anal intercourse, whether male to male or female or male to female, it has a high risk of HIV and STI. So that's how we respond to it. But in terms of learning and relearning about these issues, I lecture medical students at vets in terms of taking a sexual history. They normally know what they have to just ask about. Do you smoke? Do you how many, the risk factors in terms of other chronic non-communicable diseases, but nothing about sexuality. So I currently, and this is what I do, I'm a champion of training sensitization. We call it sensitization in a way that they understand the environment, the context of what's happening out there, and try to understand the labeling and all that. And I think more and more clinicians are opening up to that institution. When you talk about, in terms of what doctors do as well, in terms of surgical procedures, that's why we're struggling with transgender, because most of the transgender might not want the surgery. Or someone might be born with, and we don't even use the name hermaphrodite, by the way. It's a derogatory term. They don't want it anymore. So they want to understand, how do we approach transitioning? How do they approach transgender, trans women? So those are things that we are still engaging on, and I'm hoping that a lot of the medical fraternity, because I was doing this morning, and sensitizing a lot of the doctors around these issues. Though we're talking about medical issues, but we were talking about sensitization. How do you to approach a person who's a trans woman and wants hormones to continue in their transformation? Do you say, no, these hormones are for women, they are not for men? What do you do? So those are the things, and we do role plays as much as they do it for schools. But this is what doctors and nurses are struggling with. We need to make them relearn this institution, this language, so that they can understand how to provide the service.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bring us down to a conclusion and a close for today. This discussion has been highly fruitful for all, and the fact that it's being recorded is going to be greatly fruitful for whoever might find themselves accessing this online, and it will be accessible. In conclusion, my take, and the three panelists are welcome to layer on top of that, is that labels are more of a thing that impact us due to how we relate to them and how they then equate to an exclusion of anyone else outside of that distinction. And we probably need to, as a society, start cultivating these neutral spaces of being open to be receptive to all walks of people, where they're at, what they're transitioning through, and allow that to be sort of an invite, I'd probably say, to accepting ourselves. Because it's through these very practices of excluding another that makes you start to create these exclusions within yourself and go, no, I've identified as such and such, so therefore I cannot be such and such. And these very sort of crippling mindsets and addresses towards the other aspects is the same thing that we apply upon ourselves, which makes us further sort of impose that on other people. And I'd probably say that's one of the strong ways forward that I've picked up from this discussion today, and how it has impacted us. Anything else that anyone would like to add?
I think it was quite interesting hearing the two of you, one talking about labels and what it means contextually for an individual, and the other one saying most probably the problem or the issues, particularly with labels, is that they tend to be monopolized, and then only certain people then feel as if they need to own them, and then they exclude others. And I think from what I gathered from the two is that there's actually one thing, particularly as a therapist, is that when you work with a client is to make sure that they content with the sense of ambivalence. And I think most probably that's what has been coming up for me in this conversation, is that for us most probably to let go of hegemonic ideas of this is either this or either or, but actually understand how diverse and complex certain things are, and that the mere fact that it might be against your reality or your experience, it does not make it any less valuable. And if it's totally different from your experience, maybe it's an opportunity for you to learn something about another perspective. And then I think essentially then, if one then is able to contend with a sense of ambivalence, then they're actually able to navigate their way in the world, and to actually, instead of, because I hate this word of tolerating people, tolerate bugs at night so that they don't sting you. I think rather I prefer the word embracing diversity, embracing something that is different, and also understanding that it's part of your community, it's part of your reality, even though most probably you might not subscribe to it, but it's actually part of you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
I personally, I think the human experience is too intricate to fit into any labels. I, for one, as a human being, and I'll keep referring to my own personal experiences. I know I have had lots of problems fitting into labels, whether I'm in a group of people or the group dynamic, or whether I'm at home and this is the work that all the boys have to go do, and this is always the work that all the girls have to go do. I think labels become problematic in that sense because humans are built up of a lot of components, especially when we're going to speak about sexuality, gender. There's too many things that come together to create this person, because we're fragmented people, and like he said, we do come from like X and Y chromosome. So for someone to fit into that label, it becomes problematic. Also because labels are built off normality and statistics, and who gets to decide what normal is. I'm sure that the human race, maybe you can correct me, doctor, the human race is on something like under 10% of our cerebral capacity, which means that we're constantly growing. which means nobody knows what normal is yet because we are a race that is in transition. So who's to say what normal is, and who's to say who fits into that box and who creates these boxes? I think that's what we need to disrupt, dismantle, decolonize, like those kind of ideas. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Just the last thing, I'm really appreciating the space, and I've learned a lot. And always you think doctors just sit and read about medicine and diseases and things like that. But I think learning from you in terms of these discussions would really help to empower me to take it forward, because I will champion this towards my medical colleagues and say, look, this is the discussion that's happening out there, and you need to be part of that. And there's quite a lot of them I'll invite as well in future to be in these spaces, because there's quite a lot of them involved. I know with Dr. Ntlale, she's just dealing with women's health, but she also deals with men's health as well. And then and there's quite a lot. Dr. Cindy Van Zyl, she's an HIV specialist, and who I interact with quite a lot. So it's quite a lot of people that in the medical fraternity can also be part of this, so that they can champion this. And I think one thing about us as doctors, we have a powerful way of changing things, even policy. And I can tell you right now, I was in the Department of Health in National, changing policy about implementing such discussions will be good, because one of the things that we're doing now is to put transgender on the discussion and the agenda. So this is what we're doing. And so I'm really, really appreciating of the space to engage with you and be empowered and learning from you. Thank you.
Beautiful. On the topic of future sessions, there's going to be another following session, and it's titled Men and Mental Health, and that's going to be on the 7th of July. So you can put that in your calendar. But in closing, I'd love to welcome Zor up here, and he can just close us off and possibly touch on the project as a whole and the vision and where it's going, and probably where to get a hold of him and where to get a hold of this footage that we're going to be putting out. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to the guest speakers who graced us today. Thank you to our facilitator. Most definitely thank you to the audience who took time out of your day to spend and have this conversation with us. We would have not had what we had without you guys. This conversation is not about what's happening today. As one of the audience member had mentioned, it's about what do you do here on. This conversation should not start and end here. It should take on in your personal spaces. It should take on in your own personal capacity, where you engage with it internally as much as externally with your family members, your friends, whoever else that you come across, because that's the only way that humanity will change. We are in a crossroad as humanity in all spectrums, where we are dealing with the changing identities and politics of selfhood in sexuality, selfhood in race, selfhood in any other means that we define and identify as humans. And Talking Men is that platform that wishes and seeks to bring about that conversation, more specifically men, because most definitely in the past half a century, women have been doing the work. The LGBTQIA plus, and could go on, do apologize if I miss somebody else. Now the community has been doing the work, but the men have been lagging behind, and this platform is begging men to be part of this conversation, so they don't become the othering. It's quite often who is in power resists change. So we hoping that with this conversation, with this talk, with this platform, that you will extend it further.